So the new monster manual is available to buy right now in some local game stores, and after flicking through this physically and creating encounters with it on D&D Beyond, I can honestly say this is the worst of the new 2024 core rulebooks to be released. It's also the best book of monsters I've ever seen. And a disclaimer here, Wizards of the Coast, the publisher, did not send me this item for free. I have bought it both physically and on D&D Beyond, so all the opinions are my own. So when I think of a book of monsters for D&D, I think of something that should accomplish 3 things. 1, it should be a book full of well-balanced, fun-to-use monsters. 2, it should have easy-to-use stat blocks and be organized in a way that I can find what I need easily, even DMing halfway through a session. And 3, it should be fuel for my imagination, allowing me to flick through it and find ideas for my next session. So let's go through it one by one. Is this book full of well-balanced, fun-to-use monsters? Yes. And while you won't get as many brand new monsters as there are just reused monsters from old books, there are like over 100 brand new monsters that weren't in the original monster manual. Most monsters in this book are more fun to use and easier to play than they were in the last monster manual as well. But the differences are, for the most part, subtle. Unless you're pulling up old stat blocks and comparing them to new ones, you will probably not notice much of a difference. To me, this feels more like a remaster, HD version of the old monster manual. It is very good, but if I was a player and my DM started using this monster manual over the last one, the reality is I probably would not notice any difference at all. And as a DM prepping for my games, as far as the variety and balance of monsters in the books goes, compared to the last one, I probably wouldn't notice much difference either. This book is not going to change your game or prep time in any meaningful way, while I would argue that the previous 2 2024 core rulebooks would. Okay, but what about number 2? Is it easily navigated with simple to understand stat blocks? Yes, they've done a great job with that here. Even if it is a much better experience digitally than physically, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but these monsters are laid out alphabetically for the most part, and the biggest issue veteran DMs will face with this is just trying to unlearn how the old book was organized. This one's much more intuitive, and the stat blocks are genuinely better to use. Could they be even better? Maybe, but every DM has such a different style and different preferences. I think the kind of stat blocks they're using in here is a really good middle ground that gets all the info across you may need without overcomplicating it. Like these monsters, the way the stat blocks are arranged are easier to run than they used to be. Number 3 was that it should act as inspiration fodder. I should be able to peruse this book, look at the art and the descriptions, and from there create entire adventures. And for the most part, they've nailed that here. And that's mostly due to the art side. The pictures paint 1,000 words. Even if I find the art to be very much on the small side, like some of the images here take up a quarter of the page, if not an eighth, and they're so detailed, they're so good, that to see what's going on, I find myself like really getting close and squinting. Maybe I'm just getting old, but I would have loved bigger images. But I understand why they did that. They were limited in space due to the sheer amount of monsters. But part of me kind of wishes they just had less monsters and bigger art. But once again, that's subjective to me. I like pretty pictures. The lore, descriptions, and inspirational tables in the book are also mostly well done. I kind of wanted more of it. I think a lot of lore has been cut for space as well, but tables like the one that gives you examples of what a mimic could be are very much there to get you thinking differently about any given monster so you can present it in a unique way without bodies of text. And the sheer amount of variety in the monsters is great, with more options for different level challenge rating creatures. Though I have to say, I do wish, rather than giving me say 5 different types of vampires at different challenge ratings, they could have instead just give me some kind of conversion table so I could take popular monsters and lower or raise the difficulty of them myself easily. But yeah, I can't complain too much because like the sheer amount we're getting in here is impressive. Would it have benefited from less monsters and bigger art and more space for lore dumps? I think so. But I'm not going to argue with someone who thinks more monsters in a monster manual is better, because that person could very well win that argument. But there are some other things we need to talk about that will sway your decision of whether or not to grab a copy. But before that, I want to talk about Describe. Describe is a fantastic tool for tabletop RPGs, with over 14,000 vivid descriptions, immersive soundscapes by any award-winning composers, and interactive maps that help you build a more engaging world in less time. Their web app, Opus, is a standout feature. It lets you play AI-free music, ambience, and sound effects streamed through your browser or Discord. Plus, players can now trigger sound effects themselves, like the clang of a sword as they attack with their sword. The DM stays in control but can let players add to the atmosphere, making the game more collaborative and fun for everyone. And by checking out the link in the description, you'll be supporting this channel, which means the world to me, so thank you. Let's talk about the digital book versus the physical book for a minute, because most people will not need both here. It feels like this book has been not like made to be read digitally, but certainly it's been more optimized to be read online compared to other D&D books. Don't get me wrong, the physical version is still great. This is the the limited edition cover, and we'll get to the quality of the physical book itself soon, but the content itself definitely lends to it being a better experience on D&D Beyond than it would be just sitting down and flipping through the book. For example, if I wanted a CR8 monster, I can check the monsters by challenge rating list in the back of the book. There are 23 options to choose from, and I can grab one or two and then flick through the book, so alphabetical, and find them and see what I wanted to do next. But while this book is well organized, just the sheer amount of monsters in here makes it actually time consuming to flick through like that. Alternatively, I can use the contents at the front to find a monster's page number, but that turns it into a multiple step process. I'm going to the back for the CR list, then to the front for the contents, and then to the page. Oddly, the CR list at the back doesn't include page numbers, likely to keep it clean and looking nice, but adding them would have for sure made navigation much faster. This was a choice not to include page numbers on these lists at the back of this book, and it makes navigation of the book slightly more difficult. And it makes using the book on D&D Beyond a better experience, where I can just go to the CR list and click on a monster. It feels like they could have made it easier on us in the physical book, but they chose not to. Now, some of this is just a byproduct of having an encyclopedia-like book. It's like a big database, just a list. Of course, it's going to be much easier to navigate online. And while it's a small gripe, it is something to bear in mind if you're unsure whether to get the physical copy or a digital copy. I think this is a better book digitally. It is obvious that these new core rulebooks are being designed to be enjoyable to use both on D&D Beyond and off. And with the new player's handbook, I can see the virtues of both. But for me, the Dungeon Master's Guide is a better experience to read as a physical book, and the Monster Manual is better digitally. So depending on how you prep your D&D games, I would consider just getting the digital copy. It's cheaper. And no, Wizards of the Coast have still not made it so that when you buy a physical book, you get the digital for free, like other publishers have done in the space. Now, the physicality of the book itself, for those who do want something tangible to hold in their hands, is high quality. Like the other 2024 core rulebooks, this is a hefty book, making me question, do I really need over 1,000 pages of core rulebooks to run this game? Every single one of these books is exactly 384 pages long, and in my script it says, double check that. Yeah, every single one of these books is exactly 384 pages long. But that aside, the limited edition covers are fantastic. The Monster Manual looks great. And when you display them with all the other books, the colours just look so good. And it feels sturdy. I see a lot of complaints online from Wizards of the Coast. I was going to say haters, but people who aren't a big fan of Wizards of the Coast tend to say a lot that the quality of the books are terrible compared to other TTRPG publishers. And that may be true. Maybe I've got limited experience there, but I own other books from other publishers, and for me the reality is these do the job just as good as them. They hold up, and I think unless I completely manhandle this book will last me the 10 years it takes before the inevitable next update or edition comes out. Now, the big question I had about this book is, was it going to return balance to D&D? Because there was power creep. In the last 10 years, as new books came out, new classes and subclasses and species came out, and they tended to get more powerful so that people would buy the books. Only slightly, but it happened, and over time became more and more noticeable. Then the new player's handbook came out, and playable characters this time got a noticeable buff. And I don't know about you, but in general, I was finding it harder to give my players a challenging fight without giving them monsters to kill that were straight up multiple CR levels above them, when that wasn't so much the case in the past. Well, rest assured, in this book, the monsters are more powerful, or at the very least, more optimized. As I said, most changes in here are subtle, but a mix of changes to the stat blocks, leaving just better attack options in and removing a lot of fluff, and changes to initiative, meaning that most monsters now act faster, and you end up with small changes that are going to make a big difference in the long run. Now, not all monsters have been buffed. A few have been nerfed, and a few feel like they've been buffed with HP, when in reality they've just been rebalanced because they lost some damage resistances, which I do think is for the better. A lot of legendary resistances have been removed in this book for simplicity's sake, but then replaced with HP boosts. And there are some monsters that will just play kind of the same. But on a whole, this book will make combat more challenging for your players, but simpler to run for the DM, which is what we want. One thing I would like to complain about is the new NPC stat blocks. By this I mean things like the bandits, the cultists, the pirates, the priests. One thing I like to have in my games are humanoid bad guys, and I like groups of them, parties, that all have different specialities, much like my player's party does. And I would hazard a guess that a lot of other DMs use humanoid enemies a lot too. And when I was watching promotional material from Wizards, I got the impression that there would be a section separate from the more monstrous creatures, just with NPC stat blocks. Like you have the monster manual at the start, and then at the back, an NPC manual. That's kind of how it was with the 2014 monster manual. The NPCs had a separate section, but that's not the case here. In fact, these humanoid creatures are spread all over the book, which once again is not a problem in a digital book because there's just a list of them at the back and you can just click into them, but I find it very annoying to find them in the physical copy because I want to like jump between the pages and compare really easily, and it's very hard when there's hundreds of pages between them. That being said, the addition of more of these NPC stat blocks is nice, and there are a lot more of them, and they're species agnostic too, which is really nice. I know there's a lot of kickback about orcs no longer being in the monster manual, even though they're in the player's handbook now, but politics aside, I prefer what they have done here, which is that orcs have now been converted to a new stat block, simply known as toughs. I don't like the name toughs that much, but I cannot tell you the amount of times I went and took an orc stat block or a drow stat block from the 2014 monster manual and just reskinned it as a different species. In fact, I did that a lot. I've ran a lot of orc monster stat blocks in my time, and I rarely ran them as actual orcs. So now just having it as any species I want just makes sense to me. And it's especially nice for newer DMs who maybe don't realize yet that they can make these NPCs anything they want. It can be a good way to get like your imagination flowing. The most exciting part of this book though is that we have all of D&D 2024 out now, and we can start playing the complete thing. I did my first session the other night with mostly all 2024 player characters. I used 2024 monsters and I used 2024 magic items. And if there is anything to take away from the whole thing, it's that everything is subtle, but better. And the monster manual itself is to me the epitome of that. Subtle changes, but better. It's taken everything Wizards of the Coast has learned over the last 10 years of producing D&D 5e content, and it's fine-tuned it into the best version of itself for the most people. Maybe it's not the best version for you, individual DM, but for most DMs, I would say it is. Is it as groundbreaking and different from its previous version as the Player's Handbook or the Dungeon Master's Guide were from their previous versions? No. The Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide are miles better than they used to be, in my opinion. The Monster Manual is just a little better. Did this feel entirely necessary? Well, yes, as far as releasing all the new core rulebooks go, you kind of have to release a new Monsters Manual. But for the game itself, no, not really. But is it the best Monster Manual I have ever used? Yes, it is.